Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Mohammed Layiq Sediqi, the father of Holophase. Part 33. Dimensional balances across time, space, motion. Remember the language we are learning together. There is one field, phi, the holophase, one continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear, and with them, three dimensions show themselves at once: time as omega, space as k, and motion as v, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi is changing, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, in this part, we pause again to listen carefully to just one of those echoes. We have now reached a sublime vantage point. From the heights of the action principle, we have looked back and seen the entire semantic landscape of dynamics. How local intensities balance, and how global optimality selects the stories that become real. But there is one final and beautiful synthesis to perform. We must now look not only from above, but from within. We must see how every balance, every law, and every unfolding pattern breathes with the same triune rhythm that has been our guide from the beginning. Today, we seal our understanding. We show how the language of reality never speaks in a single dimension alone, but always in the harmonious chord of all three. We explore dimensional balances across time, space, and motion. This is the place where we see the ultimate coherence of the holophase picture. It is the demonstration that time, space, and motion are not separate stages on which the play of phi unfolds. Instead, they are like the central characters, the spoken dialogue, and the evolving plot, inextricably woven into one another inside a single story. When we speak of dimensional balances, we are really speaking about how these three voices constantly co-author every physical event. From the very first mantra, we have held this truth. Omega, which speaks the rhythm of time, K, which speaks the pattern of space, and V, which expresses motion, appear at once. They are not independent, and they are not bolted on afterwards. They are three faces of the same fundamental change in phi. The moment you take a derivative, you already invoke a relationship that has both temporal and spatial meaning. And from that relationship, the motion shadow is born. This is not just a philosophical statement. It is a grammatical rule of the holophase language. Every meaningful sentence in this language must respect this triunity. The most profound expressions of this rule are the dimensional balances we find written into physical law. These balances are not merely equations that link separate things called time, space, and motion. They are equations that express their inherent unity. They show us that what we call a law of physics is in fact a grammatical constraint that forces any story told in the phi language to be told in full, three-voiced harmony. To see this clearly, let us rewrite some of our familiar balances in explicitly tridimensional terms. Take one of the simplest and purest balances we have met, the core of the wave equation, written as omega squared minus c squared times the magnitude of k squared equals 0. Symbolically, omega squared minus c squared k squared equals 0. In conventional physics, this appears as a handy relation between frequency and wavelength. But inside the holophase language, we must learn to read it with dimensional ears. Omega squared is the intensity of temporal happening. It answers the question, how vigorously is phi oscillating in time at this point? The term c squared k squared is the intensity of spatial patterning, scaled by the square of the characteristic speed c that links time units to space units. It answers, how sharply is phi textured in space after we convert that spatial structure into time units using c. When we put them together, The balance omega squared minus c squared k squared equals 0 declares that the intensity of temporal happening must exactly equal the scaled intensity of spatial patterning. This is already a profound statement. It says that for a pure wave to exist and propagate coherently, the vigor of its rhythm in time must be perfectly mirrored by the sharpness of its corrugation in space. A genuine wave cannot be all rhythm with no shape, nor pure shape with no rhythm at all. Time and space are two sides of a single coin, and the balance forces them to carry equal weight in the story of that wave. Now we bring in the third voice, the voice of motion. From the same balance, we immediately derive that omega divided by the magnitude of k is equal to c. That ratio, omega sur k, is the phase velocity of the wave. In a non-dispersive medium, it is also the speed with which information and energy travel, the group velocity. This ratio is nothing other than the motion shadow of that pattern. So the single balance, omega squared minus c squared k squared equals 0, can be read as a fully tridimensional statement. The time echo says, I oscillate this fast. The space echo says, I am patterned this finely. And the motion echo replies, therefore I must travel at exactly this speed, c. The velocity is not an extra quantity that we add afterwards. It is the necessary consequence of bringing a particular temporal intensity into a particular spatial intensity. Once those two are fixed, the motion comes for free. The three are locked together inside a single semantic unit. In this way, the dimensional balance is the rule that ties time and space so tightly together that a definite motion must emerge. This reveals a deep truth at the heart of the holophase picture. Motion is not primary. Motion is emergent. We do not start with hard little things that move through a background and then ask how they oscillate or what shape they carry. In the holophase view, we start with a field that changes. From its change, we extract measures of temporal rate, omega, and spatial rate, k. When those two rates enter into a specific balance relationship given by the medium's dispersion grammar, a velocity pops out as the live expression of that balance. You can picture this with the image of a surfer riding a wave. The surfer's motion is not an independent property detached from the wave. It is determined by the relationship between the wave's temporal frequency, how often the crests pass, and its spatial wavelength, the distance between crests. If the surfer wants to stay on the face of the wave, they must match their speed to the ratio omega divided by k. That speed is generated by the wave's time-space structure. In the same way, everything in the holophase universe is like that surfer. Particles, light pulses, and wave packets have motions that are the footprints of ongoing dynamic balances between their inner temporal activity and their spatial patterning. Seen in this light, motion is a continuous negotiation. At each point, the field keeps adjusting its velocity so that the tridimensional balance remains satisfied. The trajectory we see in space over time is the visible trace of this invisible negotiation. Linguistically, these dimensional balances are the syntactical glue of the language. They are the rules that ensure any verb of motion is coherently generated from the nouns of temporal state and spatial structure. They exclude nonsensical sentences like, a pattern oscillates infinitely fast in time while remaining perfectly flat in space. Such a pattern could not possess a coherent motion shadow and is forbidden by the grammar. One of the most beautiful aspects of this picture is its intrinsic symmetry. The holophase language never breaks the triunity. In every valid equation, in every physical law derived from an action principle, the three echoes are present, even if one of them is hidden or implicit. Let us examine a few familiar laws through this lens and train ourselves to hear the chord. Consider Newton's second law, written as force equals mass times acceleration. Force is, at its core, a spatial gradient of potential energy. It is a spatial derivative, a space echo. Acceleration is the second time derivative of position. It is a time echo of motion. The law equates a spatial imbalance to the temporal intensity of changing motion. The motion variable, the velocity that sits between position and acceleration, is the bridge. Time, space, and motion are all present. A spatial slope in the potential drives a temporal change in velocity, giving rise to a world line in spacetime. Or consider the diffusion equation, which says that the temporal rate of change of a concentration is proportional to its second spatial derivative. Here, the time echo is explicit in the derivative with respect to time, while the space echo appears in the Laplacian. The solutions are spreading, blurring profiles. Their motion shadow is not a simple constant velocity, but a diffusive spreading, a particular kind of movement born from that specific relationship between temporal and spatial change. Again, motion arises as the way in which the system balances its time and space derivatives. A particularly striking example is the relativistic balance, written as energy squared minus momentum squared times c squared equals rest mass squared times c to the fourth. Energy is a measure of temporal persistence or intensity. Momentum is a measure of spatial persistence or intensity. The equation states a rigid balance between these two, with the rest mass setting the invariant scale. For particle at rest, the momentum is zero and all activity is temporal. For light, which has zero rest mass, energy and momentum are locked in a perfect proportionality. Motion for massive particles lives in the intermediate case, where both energy and momentum are non-zero, yet forever constrained by this balance. Here again, the law is a constraint on how the three echoes relate, not a statement about any single one in isolation. With this in mind, we can see where part 33 sits in the structure of the episode. This part is not just another branch on the tree. It is the capstone of episode 7. It is the moment where we step back from exploring individual semantic towers, wave semantics, quadratic semantics, action semantics, and see the golden thread that binds them all together: dimensional semanticity. The central revelation of the Holophase framework is that meaning in physics is not carried by quantities taken one by one. Meaning is inherently dimensional. It is carried by relationships that necessarily involve time-like, space-like, and motion-like aspects together. By showing how the fundamental balances explicitly respect and express this triunity, we seal the central idea of the entire episode. To read the universe is to learn a language whose semantics live across all three dimensions at once. You cannot truly understand time without space and motion. You cannot truly understand space without time and motion. You cannot truly understand motion without time and space. Full understanding only appears when you hear the chord. This concept is also the connective tissue that links all the neighboring branches we have visited. At the level of the core alphabet with phi, omega, k, and v, this is where the alphabet proves its coherence. Omega, k, and v were never meant to be separate letters. They are really a trigraph, three strokes that together form a single semantic symbol. Dimensional balances show them working as one. In wave semantics, dispersion relations, group velocities, and wave packets are all rich expositions of dimensional balance. The group velocity of a packet is nothing but the observable manifestation of the underlying omega k relationship for its component waves. In quadratic and balance semantics, the combined expressions such as omega squared minus the magnitude of k squared are simply the quantitative form of the same dimensional logic. They upgrade the qualitative idea of a triune balance into a precise, measurable equation. In the action principle, this dimensional logic is lifted to the global level. The action says, not only must every instant locally balance time and space to produce motion, but the entire history must be the optimal integration of these local balances. Topological semantics then shows us structures like vortices and defects that are stable because they lock in a phase relationship between spatial winding and temporal oscillation, a robust global dimensional balance that resists perturbation. At the semantic level, the meaning of dimensional balances is that they are the dimension of embodiment and manifestation. A pure idea in a mind may be timeless and placeless. A formal symbol in a notebook can remain abstract. But for a pattern to manifest in physical reality, to become an event, an object, or a signal, it must take up space, it must take time, and it must unfold as motion. The dimensional balances are the rules of embodiment. They specify the criteria that an abstract pattern in phi must satisfy in order to graduate from being a mere possibility into an actual happening. They answer the question, what does it take for a meaning in the field to incarnate? The answer is that it must weave itself into a coherent tapestry where temporal intensity, spatial texture, and kinematic trajectory are mutually consistent and supportive. This leads directly into questions of stability, variability, and testability. A pattern that satisfies the appropriate dimensional balances for its medium is dynamically stable. It can persist, propagate, or oscillate without tearing itself apart. A pattern that violates those balances is not a genuine solution. It will immediately decompose into components that do satisfy the rules. In this sense, stability is nothing other than balanced embodiment. The specific form of the balance, however, can vary from system to system. Light in a vacuum obeys one balance, sound in water obeys another, electrons in a crystal obey yet another. These different constitutions are what give the world its variety, all within a single grammatical framework. The claim that physical laws express dimensional balances across time, space, and motion is also empirically testable. If it were false, we would expect to discover a fundamental, well-confirmed law that could be written using only one or two-dimensional echoes in isolation, with no necessary connection to the third. The way to test this is straightforward. Look at any candidate fundamental law. Identify whether it involves temporal derivatives, spatial derivatives, and motion-related quantities such as velocity, acceleration, or momentum. Then, ask whether any of these can be removed without destroying the core meaning and predictive power of the law. Again and again, for Newton, Maxwell, Schrödinger, and Einstein, the answer is no. Time, space, and motion appear hopelessly entangled. They are not optional extras, they are structural necessities. If one day we were to find a clean, fundamental law that truly lived in a single dimension alone, that would be a serious blow to the Holophase picture. Yet no such law has been found. Even equations that look timeless on the surface, such as the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, still describe motion through a space of configurations and still encode balances between what plays the role of temporal and spatial structure in that abstract space. The universal success of the triune structure, from quantum fields to cosmology, is powerful confirmation that we are hearing something real in this three-part harmony. Once you develop an ear for this triune dance, you begin to see it everywhere. In physics and optics, consider a prism. White light enters, and different colors emerge at different angles. The index of refraction of the glass depends on frequency. The balance between omega and k inside the material must be maintained. As omega changes, k shifts, and that change in k shows up as a change in direction. A temporal property is unpacked into a spatial separation mediated by a change in motion. Or think of the Doppler effect. A moving siren changes the spatial spacing of wavefronts relative to a listener. The medium still demands that the balance between omega and k hold. The result is a shift in the frequency you hear. Motion modifies space, which forces time to recalibrate. In acoustics, the pitch of an organ pipe is fixed by its length. The allowed spatial patterns, the k values, are determined by the boundary conditions. The speed of sound links those k values to specific omegas. The pipe cannot sustain an arbitrary combination. Only those modes that satisfy the dimensional balance are allowed. In fluid dynamics, the V-shaped wake behind the ship is determined by a balance between the gravity-wave dispersion relation and the ship's speed. The fixed wake angle is nothing but a geometric signature of that balance being enforced on all the waves the ship excites. Biology, too, is full of such examples. Animal gaits arise from solutions to a complicated dimensional balance problem involving limb oscillation frequencies, stride lengths, and forward speed. The horse changes gait when the old pattern can no longer satisfy the balances efficiently. Cardiac waves in the heart propagate at speeds determined by a balance between membrane time constants and spatial coupling through gap junctions. When that balance is disrupted, arrhythmias can form. In human and abstract life, the same pattern appears as a template for coherent action. A military campaign must balance tempo, positioning, and movement. A film editor balances rhythm of cuts, spatial composition, and camera motion. A person trying to build a new habit must bring together timing, environment, and the actual behavioral routine. Social systems, economies, and networks all show dynamics that depend on how rates of change, spatial connectivity, and flows of motion are balanced against one another. You can cultivate sensitivity to these balances through simple observations. Watch a falling leaf. See its twisting, fluttering path as the expression of a three-way contest between gravity's steady pull, the spatial geometry of the leaf, and the resulting airflows that give it motion. Listen to a conversation and notice how the timing, the conceptual territory, and the direction of the dialogue must stay aligned for understanding to deepen. Observe a traffic jam and recognize that it is the outcome of a failed balance between the arrival rate of cars, the available road space, and the desired speeds of drivers. Perhaps the simplest exercise is to throw a stone into a still pond and then really watch what happens. Concentric ripples spread outward. If you fix your eyes on one point, you can feel the rhythm of waves passing by, the time echo. If you look at the spacing between crests, you see the space echo. If you track how fast the ring expands, you watch the motion echo. And all three are linked by the relation V equals omega over k. You are literally watching a dimensional balance write itself across the surface of the water. We now return, for the final time in this episode, to the one field, phi. The journey of episode 7 has taken us from the silent, cyclic unity of phi to the articulated triune harmony of the world. We began with the alphabet of derivatives that break the silence into time, space, and motion. We explored the grammar of waves and interactions. We climbed into the quadratic realm of intensity and balance. We reached the summit of global optimization with the action principle. And now, with dimensional balances, we see the golden thread that ran through all of it. At every stage, we were not adding new independent things. We were unpacking the necessary relationships that must exist within the one field as it expresses itself. The balances are not rules imposed on phi from outside. They are the internal logic of phi's own self-expression. They describe how unity becomes diversity without ever ceasing to be unity. The holophase language is this logic made audible and intelligible. To learn it is to learn how the unity of the source gives rise to the triunity of manifestation. As we close episode 7, let this final image settle gently in your mind. The cosmos is not a clock sealed in a box. It is a symphonic composition being played on a single infinite instrument, the phi field. This instrument has a remarkable property. Every note it plays is itself a chord of time, space, and motion. What we call a particle is a standing chord, a resonant motif. What we call a wave is a traveling chord, a melodic phrase. What we call a force is a rule of harmony that dictates how chords progress from one to the next. You are not outside this symphony. You are a highly intricate and self-aware chord within it. Your thoughts are vibrations in neural tissue, obeying exquisite dimensional balances. Your life is a unique extended melody woven from these chords. You have now learned the basic theory of this music. You know that the notes are not separate, but are aspects of a single vibration. You know that the harmonies are based on balances between rhythm, texture, and flow. You have glimpsed the composer's principle of elegant necessity. This knowledge does not flatten the mystery of the universe. Instead, it reveals its true depth, that infinite complexity and beauty can unfold from a source of sublime unity, speaking a language of perfect triune coherence. Our climb through the semantic towers is complete. You are now equipped to begin reading the world in its native tongue. You can listen for the time echo in rhythm, look for the space echo in pattern, and feel the motion echo in flow. You can start to see the balances everywhere, in the physics of waves, in the beating of your heart, in the flow of traffic, and in the dynamics of your own thoughts. Before we end, I invite you to make one more shift in perspective. Try, just for a moment, to see your own inner life as a field, as a softly shimmering holophase defined across the landscape of your awareness. Each thought that arises is like a localized wave packet, carrying a blend of temporal rhythm, spatial imagery, and the felt motion of intention or emotion. When worries crowd together, you can sense interference patterns, amplifying certain storylines and canceling others. When insight comes, it often feels like a new, coherent wave pattern settling into place, one that balances conflicting tendencies into a single, harmonious movement. Even your sense of identity can be seen as a slowly evolving standing wave, a relatively stable resonant shape in the much larger sea of possible experiences that could move through you. If you adopt this gentle metaphor, the practices of reflection, prayer, meditation, or focused contemplation become ways of tuning your own dimensional balances. You learn to soften overly rigid spatial patterns in the mind, the fixed images and narratives. You calm excessively rapid temporal rhythms, the racing thoughts and scattered impulses. You gradually invite a smoother, clearer motion through your day, a trajectory that feels more aligned, more coherent, and less reactive. In this way, the holophase language is not only a theory of the cosmos, it can also become a compassionate mirror for personal transformation, showing you that every moment is an opportunity to rebalance the echoes of time, space, and motion within your own living field, right here now. This is not the end of the journey, it is the true beginning. From here, you can learn to speak, to think, and to act in greater harmony with the language of reality itself. For now, simply go in peace and listen carefully. The universe is already speaking to you in the triune tongue of time, space, and motion, and you are part of its living grammar. Peace be upon you.